She hid behind a human, trembling. The night sky burned red as sirens wailed across the ruined colony. Flames rose from broken buildings, shadows running through smoke and fear. Among them was a small alien girl, her silver skin dim under the ash, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't understand the shouts, the language of the soldiers, the noise of machines. Only fear and pain echoed inside her mind. Her world had ended hours ago. The invasion had begun without warning. Humans had arrived, some saving lives, others fighting monsters from the stars. She had lost everyone, her mother pulled away by chaos, her home destroyed by falling debris. Now she was alone, shivering in the cold alley. Each blast shook the ground. Each scream cut deeper into her heart. She pressed her tiny hands against her ears, wishing the world would go silent. Then, suddenly, footsteps, heavy and fast, echoed behind her. She turned, expecting danger. Instead, she saw him, a human soldier in dusty armor, helmet cracked, his face bleeding but calm. He pointed his weapon past her, shouting something she couldn't understand. Lasers cut through the air, missing her by inches, burning the walls. Without thinking, she ran and hid behind him. Her small body pressed against his back, trembling like a leaf in storm. He didn't push her away. He just moved forward slowly, shielding her with his armored body, returning fire with controlled bursts. Smoke covered the street. The soldier crouched, turning slightly to look at her. His eyes were tired but kind. "Stay behind me," he said, voice soft. Though she couldn't understand the words, the tone was enough. It meant safety. She nodded, even though her throat couldn't form a sound. She felt his heartbeat through the armor as he stood. He fired again, then dragged her toward a corner. Each step echoed like thunder in her chest. The enemy, metal creatures shaped like spiders, crawled over the walls, their red eyes glowing. The human aimed, fired, and the creatures fell, sparks flying across the broken road. She had never seen anything like it. The way he stood, brave and unshaken. He was fighting not for victory, but for her, a stranger, a different being. When the shooting stopped, silence fell heavy. She peeked from behind his arm, seeing smoke drift across the ruined street. He turned and looked at her again, slowly removing his helmet. His face was pale, sweat running down, but his smile was faint and real. "You're safe now," he said, though she still couldn't understand. But she understood the warmth in his voice. For the first time since the world burned, she didn't feel alone. She wanted to thank him, but her voice broke into a quiet sob. He knelt down, eyes meeting hers. "What's your name?" he asked softly, but she only blinked, confused. He sighed, then tapped his chest. "Human," he said. Then he pointed at her gently. "You?" She hesitated, then whispered something that sounded broken. "Lyra." He smiled again, repeating, "Lyra," as if the word itself was precious. In that ruined place, a small bridge formed, between two worlds that should have been enemies. Between a frightened child of stars and a man who refused to let fear decide who deserved protection. A loud explosion thundered nearby, shaking the ground again. He looked up quickly, scanning the horizon. "We need to move," he murmured. Grabbing her hand, he pulled her gently toward a side path covered in smoke and light. The girl stumbled, but followed, her legs weak, her heart pounding. But now, with his hand holding hers, she didn't feel lost. Each time she looked at him, she felt something new, hope. As they passed through the destroyed street, she saw human soldiers helping others too, pulling the wounded, guiding alien refugees into shelters. For a moment she realized, not all humans were monsters. Some, like him, fought not to conquer, but to protect. When they reached an old transport vehicle, he lifted her inside carefully. He gave her a small blanket from his pack, wrapping it around her trembling body. Then he checked his weapon and looked outside again. His silhouette framed against the red sky, standing like a wall between her and the chaos. Lyra watched him quietly. She didn't know his name or his world, but she knew one thing. The moment she hid behind him, everything changed. He didn't see her as alien. He saw her as a child. Her heart, once filled with fear, began to beat with something unfamiliar. Trust. For the first time since the war began, she believed someone might actually care if she lived. The sound of his voice, the calmness in his eyes, it was stronger than the thunder outside. As the night deepened, he sat by the door, weapon across his knees. She curled up on the floor, whispering his word again and again. Human, human. And in that broken, burning world, a strange peace settled between them. A promise unspoken, but powerful. He had become her shield. And she, unknowingly, had reminded him why humanity still mattered. The promise in the fire. The night refused to end. Smoke still curled through the streets like dark rivers, carrying the scent of burning metal and fear. The human, whose name she still did not know, checked his weapon again, eyes scanning the shadows. Lyra sat quietly inside the broken transport, clutching the blanket he had given, listening to the distant hum of machines hunting for survivors. He moved like someone used to danger. Every step measured, every sound noticed. She watched him through the cracked window, the glow of fire painting his armor gold. To her, he looked like a giant from an old story, a creature made of courage instead of flesh. He looked back once, meeting her gaze. "You'll be okay," he said softly, though she could not understand. But his calm voice cut through the noise like a light. He turned and began to move again, signaling her to stay low. Minutes passed like hours. Lyra heard something outside, a faint clicking sound, mechanical, sharp, close. She froze, her small hands gripping the seat. Then the door opened suddenly, and the human pushed her down gently, whispering, "Quiet." Metal footsteps approached. Through the cracked door, she saw them. 3 spider-like drones crawling across the rubble, red eyes scanning, their legs cutting sparks into the road. The human pressed his finger to his lips, motioning for silence. Her heart beat, so hard she thought they could hear it. He waited, still as stone. When one drone turned toward the transport, he moved fast, almost faster than thought. His weapon hissed, a short burst of blue light, and the first machine collapsed into flames. Before the others could react, he threw a small disc that exploded in blinding white light. Lyra covered her ears, the blast echoing inside the metal shell. When the noise faded, he stood again, breathing heavy, his face covered in soot but his eyes still calm. He looked at her, nodded once, and said the word she was beginning to understand, "Safe." This time, she smiled weakly, whispering, "Safe," in return. They left the vehicle before more enemies came. He carried her when her legs shook too much to walk. Each step through the ruins told a silent story. Buildings once full of life, now nothing but echoes. Still, he kept going, as if a promise guided his every move. At last, they reached a narrow tunnel beneath the old colony. He set her down and took out a small light that flickered softly against the walls. The tunnel smelled of dust and rust, but it was quiet. She followed him, the echo of their steps sounding like a heartbeat. In that silence, her courage began to return. She looked up at him, his tall frame outlined against the dim glow. "What's your name?" she asked softly, the words trembling from her lips. He stopped, surprised, then smiled for the first time. "Daniel," he said, pointing at himself. "Human, Daniel." She nodded slowly, repeating, "Daniel." It felt strange, but warm, like saying the name of someone who would never leave. He chuckled softly, then said, "Lyra," pointing at her. She nodded again, smiling shyly, "Lyra." For a few minutes, they walked in quiet peace. But peace was never meant to last in a war. A sudden tremor shook the tunnel, dust raining from the ceiling. Daniel grabbed her quickly, pulling her close as rocks fell where she had just been standing. "Stay close," he whispered. They hurried through the narrow passage until light appeared ahead. It was faint, cold, but it meant the surface, freedom, or another fight. When they stepped out, the world looked different. The colony's main reactor tower glowed in the distance, surrounded by black smoke and strange lights. Machines floated around it, like vultures circling their prey. Daniel's face tightened. "That's where the signal is coming from," he murmured, checking a small device on his wrist. Lyra couldn't understand, but she saw the determination in his eyes. He turned to her and knelt. "Listen," he said gently, touching his chest. "I'll take you to safe zone." Then he pointed toward the sky. "Then go home." She didn't answer, just stared at him, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Home," she whispered, but the word felt hollow. Her home was gone, her people scattered. He saw the pain in her eyes and reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Then we make a new one," he said softly, almost to himself. Something changed in that moment. Not just for her, but for him too. He wasn't just saving a child anymore. He was protecting a reason to still believe that humanity meant something good. As they started moving again, the wind carried strange sounds. Voices, cries, explosions. Daniel raised his weapon, alert again. Lyra followed behind, trying to be brave. Her small voice whispered, "Daniel." And he looked back, giving a small nod. "I'm here." The world around them was still burning. But in that endless fire, two souls, one human, one alien, walked side by side. The universe might call them enemies. But in that moment, they were simply what the other needed most. A protector and a child. A soldier and a hope. And as the horizon burned brighter, Daniel whispered to the wind, "I promise, I won't let anything hurt you." And though she didn't understand the words, she felt them, like a shield around her trembling heart. The fire roared again in the distance, but this time, she didn't hide, because now, she had someone to stand behind. Someone who had already chosen to stand for her. The outpost of ghosts. The sun never truly rose on the ruined colony. Ash and dust hung in the air like endless twilight. Daniel led Lyra through the broken canyon path, his rifle slung over one shoulder, his other hand holding hers tightly. Every sound echoed too loudly. The crunch of their boots, the distant rumble of collapsing towers, the whisper of wind that carried the smell of metal and death. Lyra's legs hurt, but she didn't complain. She had learned that when Daniel's eyes narrowed, danger was close. And right now, his eyes were sharp and silent. Somewhere ahead, there was movement, too soft for machines, too careful for wind. Daniel raised a hand, signaling her to stay low. She crouched behind a broken wall, watching him move ahead with the grace of someone who had done this too many times before. He vanished for a moment, then returned, motioning for her to follow. They slipped through a cracked gate that once marked the entrance to Outpost Echo 9. It was supposed to be abandoned, but the hum of a generator still echoed faintly through the halls. Lyra clung to Daniel's side, her eyes darting between the flickering lights. Graffiti marked the walls, old human writing mixed with alien symbols, a memory of peace that never lasted. Inside, Daniel found what was left of a communications console. He wiped the dust and muttered, "If this still works, we might have a chance." Lyra tilted her head, not understanding, but his tone made her heart quicken with hope. She reached out, touching a cracked panel that flickered weakly under her small fingers. Then, a sound, a groan, human, from the shadows. Daniel spun around, weapon raised. Out of the darkness stumbled a man in torn armor, limping, his face pale and eyes wide with shock. "Friendlies," Daniel called out quickly, lowering his weapon. The wounded soldier froze, blinking at Lyra in confusion. "What the hell is that?" he rasped. Daniel stepped forward, voice calm. "She's with me." The man frowned. "You brought one of them here?" "They killed my unit, Daniel." Lyra shrank back, fear flooding her eyes again. Daniel's jaw tightened. "She's a child," he said, "and she's innocent." But the man's anger didn't fade. He coughed blood, shaking his head. "You're losing your mind." Daniel said nothing. Instead, he tore a piece of cloth from his own sleeve and wrapped it around the man's bleeding leg. The man stared, confused. "You still help me?" After what they did." Daniel just said quietly, "Because that's what humans are supposed to do." The man didn't reply, but the hatred in his eyes softened. Lyra watched, unsure what was happening. She only understood one thing. Daniel helped even those who doubted him. He didn't choose who deserved kindness. He just gave it. Suddenly, the lights flickered again. The wounded man gasped. "They're tracking the signal. You activated the console." Daniel cursed under his breath, pulling Lyra behind a table. Through the open doorway, they saw the red glow of scanners sweeping across the courtyard. "Drones," Daniel whispered. "We're out of time." He turned to the wounded man. "You can walk?" "Barely," he groaned, "but I'll try." Daniel nodded, slinging the man's arm over his shoulder and motioning to Lyra, "Stay close." They moved through the narrow hallway as the hum of machines grew louder. The floor vibrated, dust falling from the ceiling. Then came the shriek of metal as one drone smashed through the wall behind them, firing bright streaks of plasma. Lyra screamed, the noise cutting through Daniel's ears like knives. He turned and fired back. The blast tore through the drone's sensors, but two more crawled in from the ceiling. "Run!" he shouted, his voice raw. He pushed the wounded soldier toward the exit while covering their retreat. Lyra stumbled, tripping on debris. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her up just as a beam scorched the ground where she had fallen. He swung his rifle up again, eyes blazing. Each shot he fired wasn't just survival, it was defiance. Finally, they reached the exit, diving into the outer trench as the outpost behind them erupted in flames. Lyra coughed, dust coating her face. Daniel's armor smoked, but he was still breathing. He looked at her, smiled faintly. "Still with me?" She nodded weakly, whispering, "With you?" He exhaled in relief, then checked the wounded man, who was barely conscious now. The man looked up at Lyra with fading eyes. "Maybe," he whispered. "You're right about her." Daniel didn't answer. He just looked up at the burning outpost and said quietly, "We need to move before they find us again." Lyra followed, but as she walked, she looked back one last time. The fire reflected in her silver eyes like twin suns. For the first time, she didn't only see destruction. She saw what he had done for her, fought for her, shielded her, chosen her. In her world, humans were monsters. But this Daniel, was something else entirely. They walked through the ash until the outpost became nothing but a red glow in the distance. Daniel's steps slowed. Exhaustion pressed on his shoulders, but he kept her close. "Tomorrow," he whispered to himself, "we'll find the others." Lyra looked up and smiled softly. "Promise." Daniel hesitated, then smiled back. "Promise," he said. And somewhere far above, beyond the burning sky, the stars flickered faintly, as if the universe itself was watching and waiting to see how far one human promise could reach. Between orders and compassion, the dawn came gray and heavy. Smoke drifted across the wasteland like ghostly rivers. Daniel walked with tired steps, his armor cracked, his face lined with ash and worry. Lyra followed close, small and silent, clutching the blanket that had once been white but was now the color of dust. Behind them, the wounded soldier limped slowly. They had survived the night, but barely. Every sound of wind made them flinch. Every shadow felt like the start of another fight. Still, Daniel moved forward, guided by the faint beacon from his wrist device. "We're close," he murmured. Ahead, through the fog, a steel gate rose between broken rocks, a hidden entrance buried in ruin. The mark of the human resistance flickered faintly on its surface. Daniel sighed in relief. "We made it." When they reached the gate, a voice echoed through a speaker. "Identify yourself." "Sergeant Daniel Cross, Alpha Squad, survivor of Outpost Echo 9, he answered firmly. There was silence, then a mechanical click as the gate slowly opened. Inside was a large underground bunker lit by cold lights. Dozens of soldiers, engineers, and survivors moved between metal walls. It was safety, but only for those who belonged. And the moment they saw Lyra, the air turned cold. "Sir, that's an alien," one guard said sharply, raising his rifle. Lyra froze, her eyes wide. Daniel stepped in front of her immediately, his voice low but firm. "She's with me." The guard frowned. "With you?" "She's not human, sir. She's one of them." "She's a child," Daniel replied. "And she's under my protection." A tense silence filled the bunker, eyes staring, whispers spreading like wildfire. Then came a deeper voice from behind the crowd. "Stand down." It was Commander Reyes, a broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes and a face carved by war. He walked forward slowly, studying Lyra as if trying to see danger hidden in her trembling form. "Daniel Cross," he said. "I heard you went missing." Daniel nodded. "I found survivors, sir, and her." Reyes crossed his arms. "You know the protocol. No alien life allowed inside." Daniel clenched his fists. "Sir, she's harmless. She's a child. Her entire colony was destroyed." "She could be a spy," another soldier said. "Their tech uses children as trackers." Lyra took a step back, tears filling her eyes. Daniel looked around, seeing only suspicion. He spoke louder. "She's alive because she trusted me, because she believed a human could help her." But the commander's face stayed cold. "Your compassion is noted, Sergeant," he said. "But I have to protect the people here." Daniel's heart pounded. He looked down at Lyra, her small hands shaking, her eyes silently begging him not to let go. He whispered softly, "It's okay," even though it wasn't. Then turned back to the commander. If she can't stay, then neither will I. The room fell silent. Reyes stared at him, shocked. You're choosing her over your own people? Daniel's voice was steady. I'm choosing what makes us human, sir. The commander exhaled slowly, the weight of leadership pressing on his shoulders. Finally, he said, you get 1 day, cross, 1 day inside. Then she goes, understood? Daniel nodded, relief and pain mixing in his chest. He turned to Lyra, smiling faintly. See, you're safe for now. She didn't know what he said, but his smile made her believe it. Later, inside a small supply room, Daniel cleaned his weapon while Lyra sat beside him. She watched him quietly, eyes curious. He looked tired, his hands steady but his gaze distant. Human world, she whispered softly. No like me. Daniel looked at her, surprised. You understand? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded, little word. He smiled weakly. You're learning fast. She pointed at his chest. Daniel, good. He chuckled quietly. And you, Lyra, brave. For a moment, they both laughed, softly, carefully, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace. But outside the door, the whispers grew louder. Some soldiers wanted her gone. Others said she was a sign of something changing. Reyes stood at the command post, staring at the screen showing Daniel and the child. His expression unreadable, caught between orders and doubt. Night fell again over the hidden base. Daniel sat by the door, half asleep with his rifle across his knees. Lyra leaned against the wall, watching him. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this. Wherever he went, she would follow. And somewhere deep in the bunker, Reyes muttered to himself. If he's right about her, maybe there's still a reason to fight. Outside, thunder rolled across the dead horizon. The war wasn't over, but something was changing, quietly, invisibly. A single act of kindness was rewriting what it meant to be human. The attack in the dark. The night came fast and silent. The bunker lights flickered like tired stars, warning of power loss. Daniel sat awake, sharpening his knife, his mind too restless for sleep. Lyra lay curled beneath her blanket, breathing softly, clutching the small pendant he had given her from his broken dog tag. He watched her for a long moment. There was something peaceful about her, something fragile. She trusted him completely, and that trust scared him more than the war itself. Because he knew what this world did to innocent things. A loud alarm shattered the quiet. Red lights blinked across the hall, voices shouting, "Contact! East perimeter breached." Daniel jumped to his feet, grabbing his rifle. He turned to Lyra, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay here," he said firmly, pointing at the floor. "Do not move." She shook her head, tears forming. "Daniel, please." He hesitated, then placed his hand on her shoulder. "I'll come back, promise." And then he was gone, running into the chaos. The ground shook as explosions rocked the tunnels. Metal screamed, smoke poured through vents. Daniel joined a squad near the main corridor, the air thick with panic and fire. "Drones," a soldier yelled. They found the base. Through the smoke, Daniel saw mechanical shapes crawling down the ceiling. He fired without hesitation, blue bursts lighting the dark. The machines fell, hissing and sparking, but more followed. It was a flood, endless and merciless. Meanwhile, in the small room, Lyra sat trembling. The sounds outside grew louder, closer. She covered her ears, whispering his name over and over. Then a blast blew the door open. Smoke filled the room, and through it crawled one of the machines, red eyes glowing. It scanned the room, finding her instantly. Lyra froze, her heart pounding like thunder. The machine raised its weapon, but before it could fire, a gunshot rang out. Daniel burst in, smoke swirling around him. He fired again, tearing the machine apart, sparks showering the floor. He rushed to her, kneeling, his voice rough with fear. "You're okay, you're okay." She clung to him, sobbing, "Daniel, stay." He looked around. The walls cracked, power conduits failing, the base collapsing piece by piece. Reyes' voice echoed through the radio. "Evacuate. I repeat, all units evacuate." Daniel lifted Lyra in his arms and ran. The corridors were fire and chaos, people shouting, alarms screaming. They passed soldiers dragging the wounded. He stopped once to help lift a fallen engineer. Even now, he couldn't ignore someone in need. Lyra held his neck tightly, whispering, "Human, help everyone." He He smiled faintly through the smoke. Trying, kid. They reached the hangar bay, but the blast doors were jammed. Reyes stood there, yelling into a comm unit, backup generators offline. When he saw Daniel with the child, his expression hardened. Get her out, Cross. There's no way out unless we open the hangar, Daniel shouted. Reyes looked at him, then at the frightened child. For a moment, everything paused. The war, the smoke, the noise. And then Reyes said, Do it. Daniel handed Lyra to a medic. Stay with her, he said. He and two others pried open the control panel, sparks biting their hands. The power lines were burnt, emergency locks frozen. Manual override, he yelled, pulling the lever with both arms. The hangar doors screeched, metal bending, lights spilling through from the outside. Move, he shouted, as people began running toward the opening. He turned back to find Lyra still watching him, refusing to leave. Go, he yelled, but she shook her head. Then, from above, another drone dropped from the ceiling, claws slashing. Daniel pushed Lyra aside and took the hit on his shoulder plate, pain burning through him. He fired point blank. The machine exploded, throwing both of them backward. Smoke and sparks filled the air. When the dust cleared, Lyra crawled toward him, tears streaming. His armor was cracked, his hand bleeding, but he was alive. He smiled weakly. Told you I'd come back. She grabbed his hand, refusing to let go. Reyes and the others pulled them both out as the bunker collapsed behind. Outside, the sky was filled with fire and falling debris. The world burned again, but the two of them, human and alien, stood beneath it together. Daniel knelt beside her, breathing hard. You did good, Lyra. She looked up at him, voice trembling. Home. He stared at the burning horizon, then back at her. Not yet, he said softly, but we'll find one. And in his voice, even through the smoke and pain, she believed him. The survivors gathered around, silent. Even Reyes, hardened by war, watched the strange pair and felt something shift inside. In a universe drowning in fear, he saw a spark of what they had lost. Mercy. Maybe that was worth saving more than any bunker. The wind howled, carrying ashes across the plains. Daniel stood, helping Lyra to her feet. They had nowhere to go, but they had each other. And that, for now, was enough. Shadows across the wasteland. The world beyond the bunker was silent and endless. Ruined towers stretched like broken teeth across the gray horizon. Ash fell from the sky like dead snow, coating the ground in a thin blanket of sorrow. Daniel walked slowly through it, his rifle across his back, his other hand holding Lyra's small fingers. They had been walking for hours. The wind howled, carrying the faint cries of things that no longer lived. Lyra stayed close, her eyes scanning the distance, her voice quiet. Daniel, cold. He stopped, removing his own jacket and wrapping it around her shoulders. Better? She nodded, though her lips still trembled. He smiled faintly. You're tougher than you look. She tilted her head, not understanding the words, but his smile made her heart warm. The wasteland stretched ahead like a graveyard, but with him, it didn't feel as lonely. They followed an old road cracked by time and war. Here and there lay burnt vehicles, shattered helmets, forgotten flags. Each one whispered stories of those who had fought, those who had believed, and those who had lost. Lyra asked softly, all gone? Daniel glanced at the horizon. Most of them. Yeah. She looked down, her small feet dragging through the dust. Why fight? She asked, voice trembling. Why kill? Daniel didn't answer for a long time, then said quietly, because sometimes we forget what we're fighting for. The wind blew harder. In the distance, faint lights flickered, human campfires. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Refugees, maybe, he said. They approached carefully, moving between rocks until voices became clear. Around a dying fire sat a group of survivors, faces thin and tired. They wore old military gear, but their eyes held suspicion, not welcome. When they saw Daniel, their weapons rose instantly. Identify, one barked. Sergeant Cross, Daniel replied calmly, showing his ID tag. The man lowered his rifle slightly. You're one of the last soldiers, huh? His gaze shifted to Lyra, and his voice turned hard. What's that doing here? Lyra flinched, hiding behind Daniel's leg. She's with me, Daniel said quietly. The man laughed bitterly. You've lost it, soldier. Those things burned half our cities. Daniel's hand tightened on his weapon, not in threat, but restraint. She's a child, he said again, slower this time. Not a threat. The man spat on the ground. They always start as children. The others murmured, watching with cold eyes. Daniel could feel their anger, fueled by loss, sharpened by hunger. He took a slow breath. I'm not here to fight. One of the younger survivors stepped forward, her voice shaky. Leave her, and you can stay. Daniel turned his head slightly. Say that again? The girl swallowed. You can rest, eat, but she doesn't belong here. Lyra looked up, eyes full of tears, whispering, Daniel, please. He looked down at her, then back at the people. You think abandoning her makes me one of you? He said softly. Then maybe I don't belong here either. He took Lyra's hand again and turned to leave. Behind him, the man shouted, You're choosing her over your own kind? Daniel stopped only once, looking over his shoulder. I'm choosing to be human, he said quietly, if that still means anything. Then he walked away, his footsteps fading into the ash. Lyra followed silently, her small hand gripping his, as if afraid he'd vanish like everything else. They walked until night swallowed the world again. They found shelter inside a half-collapsed tower. Daniel lit a small fire, the orange light flickering against the concrete walls. Lyra sat close, her silver eyes reflecting the flames. After a long silence, she asked, Why help me, Daniel? He looked at her for a moment, his face soft but tired. Because someone has to stop the hate, he said, before it eats what's left of us. She nodded slowly, understanding more by tone than words. He smiled, tossing another piece of wood into the fire. Tomorrow, he said, we reach the evac site. She tilted her head, home. Maybe, he whispered, if we're lucky. But outside the ruins, something moved. A shadow against the dim sky, metallic and silent. Daniel noticed the faint hum, a sound he'd learned to fear. He put a finger to his lips, whispering, Quiet. Lyra's eyes widened. Through the cracks in the wall, she saw red lights gliding across the dark, searching. The machines hadn't stopped hunting. Daniel grabbed his rifle, his voice low but steady. Stay behind me. The firelight danced across his face as he aimed toward the sound. And in that small burning glow, Lyra saw what courage looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the will to stand even when it hurts. Because in this broken world, he wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was the last reminder that kindness could still fight back. Outside, the machines drew closer. Inside, a human and an alien waited together in the dim light. Two survivors of different worlds, bound by a promise that refused to die. The last promise. The morning rose cold and silver. The sun was pale behind clouds of dust, lighting the broken land like an old photograph. Daniel and Lyra walked together in silence, their shadows long and fragile. The smoke of the ruined cities faded behind them, replaced by the quiet hum of wind over stone. They had almost no food left. Daniel's steps were heavy, his wounds still fresh beneath the armor. But he didn't stop, not even once. He had only one thought left in his mind, to get her to safety. Ahead, the road sloped downward into a valley filled with fog. Through the mist, a metallic glimmer shone, the evacuation site. A half-working human ship sat tilted among the rocks, its engines glowing faintly. The last hope for anyone still alive. Lyra's eyes widened. Home? She whispered hopefully. Daniel smiled faintly. Yeah, maybe this time. But even as he said it, he saw movement on the ridges above. Dark shapes, moving fast, crawling over the rocks like insects. The machines had followed them. He cursed under his breath, raising his rifle. Run, he shouted, pulling Lyra behind a broken wall. Plasma blasts scorched the ground, shaking the air with burning light. Lyra clung to his arm, her voice shaking. Daniel, no, leave me. He looked down at her, eyes steady. I'm not leaving, not ever. Then he turned, firing again and again until the barrel smoked. The first wave of drones fell, but more came, hundreds more. The ship's engines roared to life in the distance. A group of human survivors waved from the ramp, shouting, Come on, hurry. Daniel looked at them, then at Lyra. If they ran now, maybe one of them would make it, but not both. He knelt down, gripping her shoulders gently. Listen, he said, you're going to get on that ship, okay? She shook her head wildly, tears falling. No, you come too. He smiled sadly. I will. Right after you, I promise. But she knew. Even if she didn't understand all his words, she understood his eyes. They were too calm, too final. The eyes of someone who had already made peace with the end. He lifted her up and ran toward the ship. The ground exploded behind them, fire chasing their steps. At the loading ramp, a soldier reached out, grabbing Lyra and pulling her inside. Daniel turned back, his rifle blazing one last time. Go, someone shouted. We can't wait. Lyra screamed, reaching toward him. Daniel. He smiled one last time. Stay safe, little one. Then he turned, firing into the storm of metal and light. The ship's engine screamed as it lifted off. Lyra pressed her hands against the glass, tears streaming down her face. Below, she saw him standing in the fire, his figure small against the endless swarm. Still fighting, still protecting, even as the flames closed around him. The last thing she saw was his face. Calm, brave, human. And then the world disappeared beneath clouds of smoke. The ship rose higher, carrying her away from the dying planet. Inside, the humans were silent. No one spoke, no one asked who she was. They saw the way she clutched the half-broken dog tag around her neck. The one that said D. Cross, and they understood. Years later, when peace returned and the stars opened again, the story of a human who saved an alien child spread across both worlds. They said he fought until the end, that he gave his life not for victory, but for mercy. Lyra grew older under new skies. She learned the human tongue. She walked among people who once feared her kind. And every night she looked up at the stars and whispered, Daniel, because in her heart, he was still there, strong, kind, unbroken. And somewhere, beyond memory, beyond war, a spark remained where he had fallen, a light that neither fire nor hatred could erase. A reminder written across the galaxy that being human was never about blood or skin. It was about choice, about kindness, about standing between fear and hope. And so the universe remembered, not the war, not the machines, not the fall of worlds, but a soldier who became a shield, and a child who carried his promise into the stars.